In the early 20th century, archaeologists discovered a group of ancient human remains discovered in the Tarim Basin, located in what is now the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of Western China. Tarim Basin is a large basin area located west of the Kunlun Mountains and north of the Tian Shan Mountains. The formation of the desert where the mummies were found is the result of climate and geological changes over thousands of years, and this location was most likely a sea or lake basin in the past before becoming the desert it is today. These mummies date back to approximately 1800 BCE to 200 CE, and their discovery has provided significant insight into ancient peoples living on the edges of what would later become Chinese territory. Although these mummies were incredibly well preserved, researchers struggled to determine where this ancient people originally came from. Now, DNA analysis shows that the people who created the Tarim Basin mummies have been based in China for much longer than previously believed. Since their discovery, the ancestry of hundreds of mummified bodies buried in boats in an inhospitable desert region of northwest China has puzzled and divided archaeologists. Found in the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang, mostly in the 1990s, the mummies' bodies and clothes are strikingly intact despite being up to 4,000 years old. Naturally preserved by the dry desert air, their facial features and hair color can clearly be seen. What makes them so controversial is that genetic, cultural, and linguistic evidence shows distinct origins. Physical appearance and DNA, the Tarim mummies are notable for Europoid or Caucasoid Western Eurasian features. Their phenotypic features include many stereotypically European traits, including tall stature, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, fair hair, long nose, elongated skulls, high cranial vaults, and others. Many of the mummies have intact hair, with colors ranging from light blonde to deep brown, and facial structures more similar to ancient Europeans or Central Asians than to the typical East Asian populations of China. Genetic studies on the remains indicate a strong connection with Western Eurasian populations rather than East Asian gene pools. Textile and cultural artifacts. The clothing and textiles found with the mummies are strikingly similar to those from Bronze Age cultures in Central Asia and regions such as Persia, Iran, and Anatolia, Turkey. For instance, the use of woolen fabrics, twill weaving patterns, and distinct decorative motifs point to cultural exchanges with or origins from these Western regions. Linguistic evidence. Some of the earliest written records and linguistic reconstructions associated with the region suggest connections to Indo European language families, such as Tocharian languages. The Tocharians were a distinct group speaking an Indo European language, quite different from Sino-Tibetan languages spoken by Chinese. They were buried in boat-shaped coffins, with funerary customs that appear non-Chinese and possibly Indo-European. Their presence challenges long-standing narratives about who the original inhabitants of the region were. Since their discovery in the 1980s and 1990s, the Chinese government has exercised tight control over the excavation, study, and interpretation of the Tarim mummies. This includes restricting foreign researchers from accessing excavation sites, delaying or denying publication of data, curating exhibits that omit sensitive historical or ethnic implications, controlling the narrative in both domestic and international media. For many years, foreign archaeologists and geneticists, especially from Europe and the United States, were banned from studying these mummies directly, even though international collaboration is the norm in archaeological research. Many scholars and observers believe the Chinese government's actions are suspicious for several reasons. The Tarim mummy suggests that non-Chinese, Indo European peoples inhabited Xinjiang thousands of years before the Chinese. This could undermine the official narrative that Xinjiang has always been a part of China, or that the Chinese have an unbroken cultural claim to the region. The Chinese government is extremely sensitive to anything that might legitimize indigenous or separatist claims, especially by the Uyghur people, who are ethnically Turkic and largely Muslim. If foreign scientists confirm that the earliest civilizations in Tarim were not Chinese, it could reshape historical timelines and challenge nationalist history promoted in textbooks and state media. Such revelations might suggest that cultural exchange, migration, or even invasion played a larger role in early Chinese history than the state would like to admit. Control of historical narrative. The Chinese government tightly controls historical interpretation as a means of maintaining political power. The discovery of European-looking mummies in Chinese territory threatens a mono-ethnic, mono-civilizational narrative that the government often promotes. Foreign research requests often denied. There have been numerous cases where well-respected foreign researchers, including geneticists, archaeologists, and anthropologists, were denied visas or research permits to study the Tarim mummies. International academic teams were disinvited or had their projects shut down after initial collaboration. Research findings that challenged the official view were either suppressed or not allowed to be published within China. For example, Victor Mayer, an American sinologist and one of the few foreign scholars allowed to study some of the mummies in the 1990s, openly criticized the political obstacles and lack of transparency he encountered. Mr. Mayer has assembled various groups of scholars to do research on the mummies. In 1993, the Chinese government tried to prevent Mr. Mayer from leaving China with 52 tissue samples after having authorized him to go to Xinjiang and to collect them. But a Chinese researcher managed to slip a half-dozen vials to Mr. Mayer. From those samples, an Italian geneticist concluded in 1995 that at least 2 of the mummies had a European genetic marker. The Chinese government in recent years has allowed genetic research on the mummies to be conducted only by Chinese scientists. Jean Li, a geneticist at Fudan University in Shanghai, tested the mummies in conjunction with a 2007 National Geographic documentary. He concluded that some of the oldest mummies had East Asian and even South Asian markers, though the documentary said further testing needed to be done. Mr. Mayer has disputed any suggestion that the advertisement mummies were from East Asia. He believes that East Asian migrants did not appear in the Tarim Basin until much later than the Lulan Beauty and her people. The oldest mummies, he says, were probably Tocharians, herders who traveled eastward across the Central Asian steppes and whose language belonged to the Indo European family, from what is now Iran. What truth might they be hiding? While we cannot definitively say what the Chinese government is trying to hide, these are the fears and theories that have emerged. That the Tarim Basin was not originally Chinese territory, but home to Indo European peoples. That Chinese civilization is not as culturally isolated or pure as nationalistic narratives suggest. In the Shawa Cemetery and other burial sites of the Tarim Basin, archaeologists discovered coffins shaped like wooden boats, oars, or paddles placed alongside the burial's rows of wooden stakes or poles, interpreted by some as resembling masts, sails, or totem markers. These are not symbolic decorations. They are real, constructed ship-like coffins buried in the sands of the Taklamakan Desert. In this context, the symbolism of the boat-shaped coffins, the Western features of the mummies, and the genetic data all threaten the state's official story, promoting a centralized, China-centric version of history, using history to justify territorial claims and suppress dissent. So when the government restricts foreign access to ancient remains that contradict its national story, many conclude that this is not about science, but about politics. Some foreign scholars say the Chinese government, eager to assert a narrative of long-time Chinese dominance of Xinjiang, is unwilling to face the fact that the mummies provide evidence of heterogeneity throughout the region's history of human settlement. As a result, they say the government has been unwilling to give broad access to foreign scientists to conduct genetic tests on the mummies. The Chinese government's refusal to allow open, international research on the Tarim mummies is viewed by many as highly suspicious. These actions suggest an effort to control historical narratives and prevent truths from emerging that might undermine nationalist ideology. Suppressing this kind of research appears to be a deliberate choice to maintain political control over the story of China's past. Why do some people mistakenly think they are ancestors of the Chinese? Because the Tarim Basin is within the modern borders of China, a common misconception is that these mummies represent early ancestors of the Chinese or other Chinese ethnic groups. However, ethnicity and cultural lineage are much more complex and cannot be assigned simply based on geography. It attests that people of the Zhou nomadic circle penetrated into the Tarim Basin along with the future China. It attests that the Turkish-style riding pants are at least a millennium older than the Chinese Empire. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I've got more coming your way. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.